whether this person or I am a big dick gay man or a small dick gay man, or I'm a big old bottom or I'm a big old top, whatever the description is, it's none of their fucking business, if you'll forgive my French. Hi, this is Mike Balaban. Welcome to another episode of BAMMER Talks. Today I'd like to discuss with you the whole notion of choosing to live in a concentration or among a concentration of gay men in what is typically known either as a Gayborhood or somewhat pejoratively as a gay ghetto. This can be either in a major urban area where gays have chosen to congregate in a certain part of the city, or it can be in a number of kind of retirement, resort-like destinations in warmer weather for the most part, where a lot of gays, as they reach retirement age or with second homes, begin to congregate there because of the benefits of seeing each other and enjoying all those communities have to offer. Some examples of those resort communities are Provincetown, which has a winter season when not a lot of people stay there, but otherwise has a kind of resort feeling to it. Fort Lauderdale and Wilton Manors in Florida, Palm Springs in California, and Puerto Vallarta in Mexico on the Pacific coast. There are probably other such communities around the rest of the world, particularly in Europe, but for the purposes of this talk, I'm going to focus on the ones that I'm familiar with in this hemisphere. When you think about living among a concentration of other gay men, you automatically and naturally think of the benefits that will come from having like-minded individuals near you to socialize, to date, to engage in activities like the sports leagues, etc., and to more readily make friends and more conveniently make friends than if you lived outside of town or in a different part of town where you aren't as close to them. Not to mention the idea that if you go on Scruff or Grindr and you're trying to meet somebody, the likelihood is that somebody you're going to connect with may only be 200 meters away. But in any event, those are the advantages, and they're pretty meaningful. And that's why a lot of people choose to live in those areas. In my case, I need to share my own personal upbringing and experience and why I have not lived in or near a Gayborhood or a gay ghetto. I came out in the 70s when I was in my 20s. And my first friends were, naturally enough, all my straight college friends, my family, and my straight fraternity brothers. Only belatedly did I start to make some gay male friends in the late 70s and early 80s. Around the same time, many of those straights in their late 20s began to couple with partners and to eventually get engaged and marry and to decide to have kids. And because it's easier with children living in the suburbs rather than inner cities, which are expensive and crowded, a lot of them moved outside of town. And when they did, they made a solemn pledge that it won't affect your friendship with us and vice versa. We'll remain close, etc., etc. But not surprisingly, what came to happen is gradually, more and more, they disappeared from my life. Their focus was on their kids, and they socialized with other nearby friends in the suburbs who also had kids the same age who can play with their kids. And we began to see each other and talk less and less frequently, and ultimately they became minor figures in my life. I was saddened and frankly hurt because they occupied a meaningful place in my life. So as I began to replace them and meet new friends in the city and became more openly and outwardly gay in every area except my Wall Street conservative job, I kind of intentionally almost made sure that I met primarily other gay men. And the idea was, gay men understand the importance of our friendship to each other and how much we lean and rely on each other, and particularly if we're single or going through a breakup with a partner, having that best friend or group of friends nearby is so valuable. They would never do what my straight friends did to me. I mean, that's a simplification and ultimately proved to be untrue, because 25 years later, same-sex marriage was legalized. More and more gay men began to get married and decided they wanted to build families and have children, whether through adoption or surrogacy. And in so doing, not unlike my straight friends a generation before that, they began to move to the suburbs, and they began to think about, I'm going to hang around with other people who have kids who are the age of my kids, who can play with each other. And suddenly, magically, they were no longer in my life in a meaningful way either. And once again, it hurt. Thankfully, they're a minority of the friends in my life, but it's just the nature of the circle of life, and you have to accept that. In any event, as I got more and more gay friends, I began to observe certain facets of gay male socialization, which I didn't really find appealing. I find that it brings out some of the worst traits in us. And again, I don't want to offend anyone here, and I recognize this is not everybody and all the time, but it is pretty commonplace when large groups of gay men get together that it brings out an inordinate amount of gossip about each other, to each other, bitchiness, snarky, sarcastic commentary, promiscuity. Oftentimes people will choose those closest to them and hook up and have sex, and then that person may end up having sex with another person in the group, and they get passed around. It's not intentional, but it happens, and that's not my view of sex. To me, sex is a personal, private, and ideally magical experience, not to be shared with others, nor to be talked about by others. And therefore, I've always shied away from that kind of behavior, or befriending people who do that a lot. And I make that very clear when I'm dealing with people, and I don't appreciate this. But a lot of people in our community do behave that way. In my case, unlike many gay men, I need a connection before I go to bed with someone. And I don't engage in what is kind of informally known as the gay handshake. A lot of gay men will meet someone, be attracted to him. The two of them will go have sex and decide maybe it doesn't work out sexually or romantically, but then remain friends or not. There's a tendency to have sex first and think about what are we going to be to each other later. Among all of my friends, certainly my close friends, the only ones I've ever gone to bed with are my former partners. It's just who I am. So again, you get in these communities with people who may or may not be sleeping around with each other, gossiping, being sarcastic, and there's an additional excessive behavior, which in particular happens in the retirement/resort communities I was referring to. And again, not everybody engages in it, but there's a high incidence of it. And that's addictive behavior. Addiction can take many forms: sexual addiction, alcoholic addiction, drug addiction. But clearly, it's not pleasant, and it can drag down a lot of people who aren't the addicts themselves. And so if and when you decide to move into one of these communities for your own reasons, you can find a really great group of friends there and live the kind of life you want. Let's say, for example, in the way I like to live. But you're going to have to be extremely careful and observant and assessing those people you meet to make sure that you and they share the same values and the same behavioral characteristics. If you do that, then you shouldn't encounter the kind of problems I've described. But as for me, I've chosen to always live in cities and in areas that may have a decent-sized gay population, but not huge concentrations of gays, so that I don't get caught up in some of the kind of behavior I've described. I hope this has been helpful. I also hope it doesn't sound like I'm displaying my own internalized homophobia. I love being gay. I have a lot of gay male friends I love and feel tremendous about, but I just recognize the tendency for group behavior to bring out some negative traits, and I want to be very clear about that. Thanks for watching. Please stay tuned for our next episode. This has been Mike Balaban, another episode of BAMMER Talks. Thank you.